You're watching the novel flow. Now, Pride and Prejudice begins.
The morning sunlight lay soft across the green fields surrounding Longbourn House, spreading in delicate ribbons through the mist that lingered from dawn. Birds stirred in the hedgerows, filling the countryside with their gentle songs. It was a morning like many others in rural Hertfordshire, quiet, slow, touched with the soft grace of English nature. Yet inside Longbourn, peace never lasted long. Mrs. Bennet rushed through the hallway with her usual fluttering excitement, her gown swishing as though her enthusiasm might lift her from the ground entirely. She had news that in her mind was nothing short of life-changing. "My dear Mr. Bennet, have you heard? Netherfield Park is let at last!" Her voice rang through the house like the dramatic opening note of a symphony. From behind a newspaper, Mr. Bennet raised his eyebrows with practiced patience. "Is it indeed?" Mrs. Bennet hardly needed encouragement. She lived for such moments. "Yes, indeed. A young man of large fortune, 4,000 or 5,000 a year, and he has taken Netherfield Park. Oh, what a fine thing for our girls!" Her voice was bright with maternal ambition, the kind she wore as comfortably as her shawl. Elizabeth Bennet sat nearby, trying, though failing, to suppress a smile. As the second eldest, she knew her mother's ways inside and out, and found amusement where others found exasperation. Jane Bennet, serene as ever, listened quietly. She had the kind of beauty that seemed born from kindness itself. Soft eyes, gentle expressions, a presence that soothed rather than startled. Mary read in the corner. Kitty and Lydia whispered about officers. Life at Longbourn was lively, loving, chaotic, and on this morning, it began to shift. For this young man, Mr. Charles Bingley, would bring with him events none of them could foresee. And someone else would arrive because of him. Someone whose presence would alter the course of their lives entirely. The days that followed were filled with ceaseless talk of the new tenant at Netherfield Park. Mrs. Bennet envisioned him as a perfect match for one of her daughters, preferably Jane, because in her eyes the eldest deserved the best fortune. Elizabeth, with her sharp wit, teased her sisters gently about her mother's schemes. But beneath her playfulness was curiosity. Who was Mr. Bingley? What kind of man was he? And would he truly play such a role in their lives as everyone predicted? The questions lingered like a breeze that turns pages in a book before the story is ready to unveil itself. Within weeks came the much-anticipated announcement. A ball. A grand assembly at Meryton. Mr. Bingley would be there. The excitement in the Bennet household rose like a gathering storm, loud, thrilling, unstoppable. The ballroom glowed with lantern light, warm and golden. Music drifted through the air as couples spun across the polished floor. Laughter, whispers, and the soft rustle of gowns blended into a living tapestry of Regency elegance. When Mr. Bingley entered, all eyes turned. He was exactly what the rumors promised: cheerful, friendly, and unaffected by pride. His smile seemed sincere, his gestures open, and his admiration of Jane immediate. But it was the man beside him that drew far more attention. Tall, handsome, impeccably dressed in dark evening attire. A face sculpted with aristocratic sharpness. Eyes that observed more than they expressed. He carried dignity like a cloak, and a quiet severity that made the room shift around him. He spoke little, smiled less, and looked like he existed on a higher ledge of society than the rest. Elizabeth saw him from across the room and felt the instinctive tug of curiosity. He looked like a man woven of mystery, unwilling to be read, unwilling to be approached. And yet everyone noticed him, even if he pretended not to notice. Mr. Bingley requested the first dance with Jane Bennet. Their grace together was unmistakable. Jane glowed, not because of vanity, but because she was incapable of appearing anything less than gentle and warm. Elizabeth watched them with genuine affection. She knew her Jane's heart, quiet, hopeful, always seeing the good in others. Bingley's open admiration seemed almost too perfect. And for a moment she thought the night would belong solely to Jane's quiet beginning of happiness. But destiny had other plans. Darcy, Pride, and the first wound. When Elizabeth danced with her friends, her laughter floated through the room, bright, intelligent, alive. She moved with ease, her steps filled with natural confidence. Darcy noticed. He noticed more than he intended to. Yet when Mr. Bingley urged him to dance, Darcy declined with a dismissiveness that struck the air like a cold draught. "Come, Darcy," Bingley smiled. "There are plenty of charming ladies here." Darcy's eyes flicked toward Elizabeth, just for a moment before he spoke. "She is tolerable, I suppose, but not handsome enough to tempt me." Elizabeth heard it. The words burned, not deeply, but sharply enough to kindle something between them, something that was not yet hate, but certainly not affection. Yet even as she laughed it off with her friends, Darcy's gaze returned to her, noticing the fire in her eyes, noticing the way she carried herself with uncommon ease, noticing what he pretended not to see. Elizabeth Bennet was unlike any woman he had met. But his pride was a wall far too high for him to admit this, not even to himself. An ending that was also a beginning. The ball ended with a mixture of delight and dissatisfaction. Jane drifted home with her heart touched by new admiration. Elizabeth carried irritation mixed with curiosity. Mrs. Bennet left convinced that destiny had opened its first door. And Darcy departed with a mind he could not fully understand. The outside air was cold, but the night carried with it the warmth of change. It was the beginning of a story shaped by first impressions, and the quiet unfolding of everything those impressions concealed. As Elizabeth walked home under the soft glow of lanterns, she looked back toward Netherfield. She did not know why. A simple glance, a small, unexplainable pull. But some beginnings are felt before they are understood, and this was one of them. The days following the Meryton Assembly unfolded with a quiet mixture of curiosity and anticipation. Longbourn buzzed with talk of Mr. Bingley's warmth, Jane's gentle grace, and of course, Mr. Darcy's sharp remark that Elizabeth had overheard. Though Elizabeth recounted it with humor, there was something underneath her laughter, something that stirred like a subtle, unseen breeze. She was not a woman easily wounded, yet she was not a woman who forgot. Winter crept closer, and the countryside turned cool and crisp, the leaves crackling beneath their feet, their conversations wandering from dresses to dances to the mysterious new tenants of Netherfield. Elizabeth found herself reflecting on Mr. Darcy more than she wished, mostly in irritation, sometimes in curiosity. Jane spoke of Mr. Bingley with careful composure, her smile softer, her thoughts drifting toward him with a tenderness she barely admitted even to herself. And then came the invitation that would draw the Bennets closer to Netherfield in a way none of them expected. Jane's journey to Netherfield. One morning, a letter arrived for Jane. Its edges were crisp, the handwriting delicate. Miss Caroline Bingley, inviting Jane to dine at Netherfield. Mrs. Bennet nearly dropped the teacup in her excitement. "Oh, Jane, my dear, you must go at once, on horseback. If you go by carriage, they will send you home early, but on horseback you will be forced to stay the night should it rain." Elizabeth stared at her mother with amused disbelief. "Mama, you cannot send Jane out merely to catch a cold." Mrs. Bennet waved her concerns away. "Nonsense, Lizzie. A little cold is nothing compared to the chance of a favorable marriage." Jane, gentle as always, disliked causing anyone worry. "If it pleases you, Mamma, I shall ride." And so Jane took the horse, her cloak tied against the chill of the afternoon wind. But the clouds above thickened like a promise. Before nightfall, a storm burst open. Rain swept across the fields, heavy and relentless, turning the journey into a test of endurance. By the time Jane reached Netherfield, she was shivering, pale, her breath strained. Miss Caroline Bingley met her at the door, elegant, poised, and eager to appear hospitable. "You are soaked, Miss Bennet. You must stay the night." But the rain had done more damage than wet her dress. By morning, Jane was ill, feverish and weak. Elizabeth received the message with immediate concern, and without hesitation, despite the muddy roads, despite the distance, despite propriety, she walked all the way to Netherfield. Through damp fields, over uneven ground, her shoes stained with mud, her hem soaked, her heart steady with purpose. When Elizabeth Bennet arrived, tired, flushed, and determined, Mr. Darcy happened to be near the window. He saw her, and in that single moment, something in him shifted. A woman walking miles in the rain for her sister. There was devotion in that act, strength, character, and Darcy found himself unable to look away. Elizabeth at Netherfield. Elizabeth was escorted inside, her cheeks warm from exertion, her eyes bright despite the exhaustion. Miss Bingley raised her eyebrows with barely concealed disapproval. "To walk all this way alone and in such condition," she trailed off, the criticism sweetened with false politeness. But Bingley stepped forward with genuine concern. "Miss Elizabeth, you must be fatigued. Jane is resting upstairs. Please let me have refreshments brought at once." Elizabeth thanked him and followed the servants to Jane's room. There lay Jane, gentle Jane, her beauty tempered by fever, her voice weak but filled with happiness at her sister's arrival. "Lizzie, I did not want to trouble you." Elizabeth took her hand. "You are my dearest sister. Nothing could keep me away." And she stayed, through the day, the night, and the days that followed. Meanwhile, Darcy found himself drawn to the quiet presence of the Bennet sisters, more accurately to the presence of one of them. Candlelit evenings and unspoken tension. That evening, Elizabeth joined the Bingley household in the drawing room. Jane slept comfortably upstairs, her fever slowly easing under warm blankets and attentive servants. Elizabeth sat with a book in her hands, though she read very little. She felt eyes on her. Darcy tried, unsuccessfully, to pretend he wasn't watching. Miss Bingley noticed Darcy's attention immediately and disliked it. She drifted toward him, her gown rustling like silk that wished to be heard. "Mr. Darcy, I cannot comprehend Miss Elizabeth's decision to walk here. How very rustic." Darcy barely turned his head. "I admire her devotion." Miss Bingley blinked, startled by his candor. "Oh, yes, devotion, of course." Elizabeth looked up from her book, sensing, though not fully understanding, that she had become the center of an unspoken tug of curiosity. She caught Darcy's gaze for half a second. He looked away first, not because he wished to, but because he did not know how to hold her gaze. Wit against pride. The next morning, Jane showed slight improvement, enough to let Elizabeth breathe more easily. She remained by her bedside, but joined the household occasionally. At breakfast, Elizabeth found herself across from Darcy, who watched her with complex, unreadable eyes. Miss Bingley attempted to make conversation in her usual polished manner. "Miss Elizabeth, surely you prefer the comfort of home to such inconveniences as nursing an ill sister in a strange house." Elizabeth smiled a polite but sharp smile. "My sister's comfort is my home, Miss Bingley." Darcy lowered his eyes, hiding his approval. Elizabeth sensed it, felt it almost like warmth, but refused to acknowledge it. Her opinion of him had not yet softened. Still, there was something intriguing about a man who listened so intently. Later in the drawing room, the conversation shifted. "Miss Elizabeth," said Bingley cheerfully, "would you not care to join us in a dance one evening? You danced beautifully at the assembly." Elizabeth laughed lightly. "Only because I had lively company." Darcy, sitting nearby with a book he wasn't actually reading, felt that laughter in a way he could not explain, somewhere between admiration and discomfort. Miss Bingley caught the moment again. Her smile tightened. "Do you not wish to practice your steps, Miss Elizabeth? Mr. Darcy is a fine dancer." Elizabeth, aware of the provocation, replied calmly, "I am not fond of dancing unless I am particularly acquainted with my partner." Darcy's voice entered quietly, unexpectedly. "Do you find dancing so disagreeable?" "I find forced dancing disagreeable," Elizabeth said, her tone polite yet bold. A silence followed, sharp, warm, charged. Then Darcy's lips curved slightly. "I cannot disagree." The moment passed, but the air between them felt heavier, full of words neither dared to say. Darcy's quiet conflict. In the evenings, Darcy often retreated to the corner of the drawing room with a book or a letter, but his attention drifted again and again to Elizabeth, to her animated expressions, to her quick wit, to her care for Jane, and to the natural confidence she carried without trying. She was not a woman he knew from London's polished salons, who flattered, who performed, who guarded every word with calculation. Elizabeth was real, unfiltered, intelligent, bright in a way that unsettled him. He told himself again and again that she was beneath him in society, in fortune, in family connections. Yet every time she entered the room, it felt as though some inner door he had kept tightly closed shifted just slightly on its hinges. Miss Bingley noticed, of course. At every opportunity she praised Darcy's home, Darcy's wealth, Darcy's taste in literature. "Pray, Mr. Darcy, do tell us more of your dear sister. She must be as accomplished as you." Darcy offered a faint smile. "Georgiana is a gentle soul." Miss Bingley eagerly continued, "Indeed, and how she must admire the air of refinement that surrounds you." Elizabeth glanced at Darcy, half amused, half empathetic. Miss Bingley's intentions were clear to everyone except herself. Darcy, feeling Elizabeth's judgment and curiosity, shifted in his seat, unsure whether to impress her or disappear entirely from the room. Jane recovers, and Elizabeth reflects. After 3 days, Jane's fever lessened. Color returned to her cheeks. Her voice regained its calm softness. Elizabeth felt relieved, though part of her had grown accustomed to the strange world of Netherfield, its conversations, its silences, its undercurrents. She had not forgiven Darcy's insult at the assembly. She had not forgotten Wickham's charming smile and Darcy's cold stare. She had not lost her ability to laugh at Darcy's seriousness, but she could not deny something else. He was not merely... Morning crept over Longbourn with a softness that almost felt like a blessing. Pale golden light filtered through the curtains of the Bennet home, illuminating dust motes that floated like tiny suspended dreams. Birds sang from the orchard outside, their melodies fluttering through open windows. Yet inside the house, the atmosphere was anything but calm. Mrs. Bennet's excitement from the previous night had not subdued, it had multiplied. News of Mr. Bingley was no longer a whisper. It had become a rising tide that filled every corridor of the house, every breakfast conversation, every passing thought. Elizabeth descended the stairs slowly, her fingers grazing the polished banister as she listened to the faint chatter coming from the dining room. Her mother's shrill enthusiasm rose and fell like the call of an eager bird. "Oh, my dear Mr. Bennet, you must go visit him today. How can you sit there so calmly when our whole future may be changed by one gentleman moving into the neighborhood?" Elizabeth smiled faintly. Her mother's dramatics were familiar, almost comforting in their predictability. But beneath the humor lay a truth she could not ignore. Their lives were fragile. Their fortunes, their futures, their choices, everything depended on marriage, on respectable ties, on chance encounters written by society more than by their own hearts. Elizabeth stepped into the dining room just as her father lifted his teacup with deliberate slowness, his eyes sparkling with suppressed amusement. "My dear," he said, "if I must venture into the world every time a new gentleman takes a house, I shall be worn to the bone." Mrs. Bennet gasped dramatically, and Elizabeth took her seat before her smile betrayed laughter. Across the table, Jane sat with her usual serene expression, though there was a light in her eyes, one that Elizabeth recognized immediately: excitement, curiosity, hope. For Jane, hope was a quiet thing, like a rose that opened slowly. For their mother, hope was a firecracker exploding at the slightest spark. "Lizzie," Mrs. Bennet said to her with sudden intensity, "you must support me in this. Mr. Bingley is said to be handsome, charming, and, oh, the sweetness of it, wealthy. Only think what good it would do for you girls." Elizabeth took a sip of tea, choosing her words carefully. "We shall learn more of him soon enough. There is no sense rushing the stars to reveal their intentions." Mrs. Bennet waved a hand. "Nonsense! Stars do nothing unless we push them a little." Mr. Bennet let out a soft chuckle behind his cup. That morning, as Elizabeth and Jane walked into the fresh air of the garden, the world felt suddenly wider. There was the excitement of novelty humming in the breeze, the sense that something unseen had shifted in the threads of destiny. Jane exhaled softly. "Do you think he will be kind, Lizzie?" "I think if he is half as kind as you, then the entire county will adore him." Jane looked away, cheeks pinking. "I think Mama hopes too much." "She always does," Elizabeth said gently. "That is her nature, and we cannot blame her for wanting the best for us. But remember, Jane, you must let your heart choose, not anyone else." Jane nodded, though the uncertainty lingered in her eyes. News traveled quickly in Hertfordshire. Before noon, the neighborhood had nearly drowned in the gossip of Mr. Bingley's arrival, how many servants he brought, what horses his stable held, what cut of cloth he preferred, and whether his fortune truly amounted to the rumored 5,000 a year. But nothing stirred the collective imagination so powerfully as one revelation. Mr. Bingley intended to attend the upcoming Meryton Assembly. The Bennet household erupted into motion faster than a summer storm. Lydia and Kitty shrieked with delight. Mary tried to appear indifferent but could not hide her quiet curiosity. Even Mr. Bennet raised an eyebrow when the news reached him. Mrs. Bennet declared the event the golden opportunity of the century. Elizabeth watched the swirl of excitement with amusement, though she felt a flutter of anticipation. Not for romance, not yet, but for the unknown. New faces brought new stories, and new stories brought new understandings of the world. That evening, Elizabeth sat by candlelight in her room, reading, but the words blurred gently as her mind drifted. She imagined what kind of man Mr. Bingley might be. Cheerful, perhaps, cordial, someone who entered a room with warmth rather than pride. Someone, she hoped, who would see Jane's goodness, not just her beauty. The night breeze carried faint sounds of distant laughter from the village, and Elizabeth closed her book. Change was coming. She felt it in her bones. The day of the assembly arrived like the unveiling of a long-awaited play. From early morning, the Bennet household buzzed with threads of nervous anticipation. Silk ribbons were strewn across beds, corsets were pulled tighter, shawls were draped and redraped. Lydia declared herself positively faint with delight at least 3 times before noon. Elizabeth, though equally curious, carried her excitement differently. She felt it like a warm undercurrent, steady, hopeful, but grounded. As Jane dressed in her pale blue gown, Elizabeth paused, her breath briefly catching. Jane looked radiant, not merely beautiful, but serene, as though she carried the quiet light of dawn within her. "You look like the first breath of spring," Elizabeth said softly. "You always say such things, only when they are true." When the sisters descended the stairs, they found Mrs. Bennet pacing with anxious energy. "Come, come, we must not miss the arrival of Mr. Bingley. First impressions are diamonds, they last forever." Mr. Bennet, waiting by the door, offered Elizabeth a conspiratorial look. "Your mother is determined to secure us all a grand future tonight." Elizabeth laughed. "Then we must make sure the evening is memorable." Dawn in Hertfordshire stretched itself slowly across the world, painting the sky in pale pinks and muted golds. Elizabeth Bennet walked along the narrow footpath outside Longbourn, her boots brushing drops of morning dew from the grass. Behind her, the house still slept in a fragile hush, except for the distant stirrings of her mother preparing for the day's eagerly anticipated gossip. Elizabeth breathed in the cool air. The Meryton assembly had left ripples in her mind that had not yet settled. Jane's gentle excitement, Bingley's radiant delight, Darcy's cold eyes and colder words. Everything seemed to hang in the space between memory and meaning. As she walked, she mulled over Darcy's dismissive statement, not with pain, but with the amusement of someone who understood her own worth perfectly well. His pride belonged to him, not to her. Yet there had been something else, something that flickered in his expression during the dance he refused to join. Something thoughtful, uncertain, almost conflicted. Elizabeth shook the thought away. No use assigning depth to a man who guarded himself so tightly. But still she had felt his gaze linger. Later that morning, the Bennet household burst into motion once again when Jane received an invitation from Miss Caroline Bingley to dine at Netherfield. Mrs. Bennet could not contain her triumph. "Oh, Jane! My dearest, sweetest Jane, I told you Mr. Bingley admired you. I told you. And now you are invited to dine in his very home. Oh, the blessings of the heavens." Elizabeth, leaning against the doorframe, hid a smile. Her mother's excitement, though theatrical, was almost charming in its sincerity. Jane folded the letter shyly. "Miss Bingley is very kind. She writes that her brother hopes I will join their circle for an intimate dinner." Her cheeks warmed slightly, and Elizabeth touched her arm with a gentle squeeze. But just as Jane prepared to leave, clouds gathered in the sky, dark, moody, and full of unspoken warning. "Perhaps I should wait," Jane murmured, glancing out the window. Mrs. Bennet waved the idea away with dramatic flair. "Nonsense, child. A little rain never harmed anyone. You must go. And if you catch a slight cold, Well, what is a cold when weighed against a gentleman's admiration? Elizabeth's eyes widened. Mamma! But it was already too late. Jane was ushered out with the maid and carriage, her soft hesitation drowned in the tide of her mother's ambitions. The storm arrived faster than expected. By evening, rain hammered against the windows with a wild, relentless rhythm. Thunder rolled across the fields like distant cannons. Elizabeth paced near the fireplace, her brows knotted with worry. When the knock came at the door, urgent, insistent, Elizabeth rushed to open it. A drenched servant from Netherfield bowed with a weary breath. Miss Jane Bennet has taken illness. She will need to remain with us until her fever settles. Elizabeth's heart tightened. Fever? The servant nodded. Mr. Bingley and his sisters are caring for her, but Miss Caroline insisted that the family be notified. Mrs. Bennet clasped her hands dramatically. Oh, what fortune! What perfect fortune! Mamma, Elizabeth snapped softly, Jane is sick. Yes, yes, but she is sick in a rich man's house, Mrs. Bennet whispered triumphantly, as though the universe had personally arranged the situation. Elizabeth felt a heavy mixture of tenderness and unease. She could not let Jane face her illness alone, not in a strange house, not dependent on the kindness of people they barely knew. I must go to her, she said firmly. Mrs. Bennet gaped. In this storm? Elizabeth grabbed her cloak. In any storm. The path to Netherfield was long, muddy, and beaten by sheets of unforgiving rain. Yet Elizabeth walked with unwavering determination. Her boots sank into soft earth. Water clung to her lashes like icy tears. By the time she reached the grand estate, her cloak was soaked, her dress heavy with rain. Netherfield glowed through the storm like a fortress of warmth, its windows flickering with golden candlelight. A startled servant led her inside. Miss Elizabeth Bennet has arrived, he announced to the drawing room. Miss Caroline Bingley's eyes widened at the sight of Elizabeth's drenched figure. For a moment, shock flickered across her polished features, but only for a moment. Then her lips curved into a sharp, amusing smile. Why, Miss Bennet, you have walked all this way? How very rustic. Elizabeth offered a cool nod. My sister was unwell. I could not remain at home. Before Caroline could reply, Mr. Bingley rushed into the room with genuine concern lighting his face. Miss Elizabeth, your sister is resting upstairs. She had been hoping you would come. Elizabeth's relief softened her expression. Thank you, Mr. Bingley. May I see her? Of course, he said, offering his arm to guide her towards the staircase. But another voice, low, warm yet restrained, cut through the room like a quiet chord. Miss Elizabeth. Elizabeth turned. Mr. Darcy stood near the fireplace, a book in hand. He looked at her, really looked at her, with a gaze that seemed deeper than anything he had offered her the night of the assembly. His dark eyes softened, almost imperceptibly. You walked here, he said, not as a question, but as an observation filled with something she had not heard from him before. Concern, respect, a flicker of something unspoken. Elizabeth lifted her chin lightly. My sister needed me. A pause passed between them, brief but charged with unfamiliar weight. Darcy inclined his head slightly. Of course. No disdain, no coldness, no dismissive judgment. Something was shifting. Elizabeth followed Bingley upstairs, but could not help noticing Darcy's eyes following her with an intensity he did not seem to know he possessed. Jane lay in a beautifully furnished guest room, pale beneath the warmth of heavy blankets. Her breathing was soft but strained, Fever brushed her cheeks with faint roses. Elizabeth rushed to her side and clasped her hand. "Jane, I'm here." Jane's eyes opened slowly, their gentle calm dimmed by fever. "Lizzie, you shouldn't have walked in the rain." Elizabeth smiled softly. "I could hardly sit at home while you suffered alone." A faint, tired smile touched Jane's lips. Miss Caroline Bingley drifted into the doorway, her expression delicate blend of politeness and disapproval. "Miss Elizabeth, I trust you found your accommodations comfortable?" Elizabeth returned the smile politely. "Very much, thank you." "Oh, we do hope dear Jane recovers soon, though I suppose your unexpected stay has given you a unique experience of our humble home." Elizabeth knew a veiled jab when she heard one, but before she could reply, Darcy stepped into the room behind Caroline. His gaze found Elizabeth almost instantly. "Good morning," he said quietly. Elizabeth offered a polite nod in return. But this time, when Darcy's eyes lingered on her, she felt something shift, subtle yet undeniable. A thread, pulled taut between two unlikely souls. Not affection, not yet, but curiosity, respect, an awareness they had both tried not to acknowledge. Elizabeth looked away first, her heart stirring with questions she could not yet shape into words. She had come to Netherfield out of love for her sister, but she was leaving with something she had not expected to find. A strange, rising awareness of a man she had once dismissed entirely. A man whose pride still troubled her, but whose complexity now intrigued her. A man who watched her as though discovering something he had not meant to see. And in that quiet shift, Elizabeth felt the first stirring of a story she did not yet understand. A story shaped by misunderstandings, by rising emotions, and by the tension that neither she nor Darcy could quite escape. The air between them was changing. And so the slow dance of Pride and Prejudice began, not with affection, but with the subtle unraveling of assumptions, with curiosity, with... Morning sunlight shimmered across the fields surrounding Netherfield as Elizabeth helped Jane prepare for the journey back to Longbourn. Jane's cheeks had regained their gentle warmth. Her eyes, though still soft with fatigue, glowed with quiet gratitude. As they descended the stairs together, Elizabeth felt a lightness in her chest, part relief, part anticipation. Netherfield had become a place of strange, shifting emotions, and leaving it felt like stepping out of a dream. Mr. Bingley met them at the bottom of the staircase, his expression openly tender. "Miss Bennet, I fear the house will feel quite dull without your presence," he said sincerely. Jane blushed, lowering her eyes. "Your kindness has meant more than I can express." Caroline Bingley stood nearby, her posture as sharp as the lines of her elegant gown. She smiled at Jane, polite, practiced, then turned to Elizabeth with a cool glimmer in her eyes. "I do hope your walk home will be much drier than your walk here, Miss Elizabeth," she remarked. Elizabeth smiled pleasantly. "If it rains, I shall manage well enough. I am rather used to weather." Darcy stood slightly behind Caroline, silent but observant. His gaze flicked to Elizabeth, lingering just long enough for her to feel it. Elizabeth dipped her head in farewell. Darcy inclined his head in return. A moment, quiet, brief, passed between them. Not warm, not cold, just charged. And then the Bennet sisters were gone. A return home and a brewing storm. Longbourn revived immediately upon their arrival. Mrs. Bennet's emotional celebration of Jane's recovery filled every corner of the house. She fussed over her daughter with maternal theatrics, then swiftly shifted to praising her own excellent judgment about sending Jane in the rain. Jane watched the spectacle with affectionate amusement, but she felt a strain beneath her chest. Something at Netherfield had unsettled her. Not Darcy. Not exactly. It was something between them, a shift, a spark of tension she could not yet understand. She had felt his eyes on her more than once. She had caught him studying her with a mixture of hesitation and something unspoken, as though he was trying to unravel something within himself. Elizabeth brushed the thought away. Darcy was not a man she intended to dwell upon. Yet somehow, thoughts of him lingered like the memory of a cold breeze. The following days at Longbourn passed with their usual lively rhythm. Kitty and Lydia chattered endlessly about officers. Mary lectured on virtue. Mr. Bennet found refuge in his library. And Elizabeth tried to find clarity in the chaos. She walked more often through the fields, hoping fresh air might quiet the strange restlessness inside her. But the conflict was only beginning. Mr. Collins arrives. One crisp morning, the Bennet household received an unexpected visitor. A man stepped through the doorway, tall, awkwardly solemn, with a severe haircut and a self-satisfied smile. His posture suggested importance. His eyes suggested confusion. Mr. Collins, the very man destined to inherit Longbourn if Mr. Bennet passed away. His letter, overflowing with flattery and pompous humility, had already painted him as a man of excessive self-importance, but in person he exceeded expectations. "My dear cousins," he exclaimed, bowing dramatically. "What a delight, what an honor, what a profound blessing it is to finally meet the young ladies of Longbourn." Mrs. Bennet beamed, partly from politeness, and partly because Mr. Collins had hinted that he wished to marry one of her daughters. Elizabeth just barely managed not to smile. Mr. Collins soon revealed more than enough about his motivations. He praised Lady Catherine de Bourgh every 5 minutes. He admired the Bennet household with rehearsed enthusiasm. He complimented the daughters with a kind of forced solemnity that made them all slightly uncomfortable. But soon enough his intentions became obvious. He wanted to marry one of the Bennets, and Mrs. Bennet wanted that one to be Elizabeth. A walk to Meryton and an unexpected introduction. Mr. Collins insisted on accompanying the sisters to Meryton the following afternoon. He walked with Elizabeth at his side, trying and failing to impress her with endless flattery and stories of Lady Catherine's great condescension. Elizabeth looked forward to the walk ending. But the real shift came when the group encountered a handsome young officer in a bright red coat. He bowed, his smile smooth and charming. "Mr. George Wickham," he introduced. His eyes, soft, warm, undeniably attractive, fell upon Elizabeth. Something in his manner felt instantly familiar, effortlessly likable. Elizabeth returned his smile. Lydia whispered gleefully to Kitty. Jane exchanged a courteous nod. Mr. Collins puffed up importantly. And then another voice approached. Cool, controlled, deep. "Wickham." Elizabeth turned sharply. Mr. Darcy stood just paces away, Mr. Bingley beside him. Darcy's expression had darkened, like a sky clouding before a storm. Wickham stiffened. His pleasant smile faded. "Mr. Darcy," he said flatly. For a tense, electric moment, the two men stared at each other, silent, rigid, rooted in some fierce hidden history. Elizabeth felt her heartbeat quicken. What could this mean, she wondered. Darcy barely inclined his head and walked past without another word. Bingley attempted a polite smile, but his discomfort showed plainly. Wickham exhaled slowly after they left. Elizabeth sensed conflict, deep conflict, much deeper than either man wanted to reveal. And something inside her, some mix of curiosity and instinct, urged her to understand. Wickham's story, truth or illusion? Later that evening, Elizabeth found Wickham at a gathering in her aunt's house. They spoke quietly near the window, the candlelight casting warm shadows across his features. His charm was magnetic, his voice soft and sincere, his manner gentle enough to draw trust. It didn't take long for the subject of Darcy to arise. Elizabeth hesitated, then asked carefully, "You and Mr. Darcy seem acquainted." Wickham's expression darkened with the weight of buried pain. "We grew up together," he said. "My father was like a second father to me." Elizabeth blinked, surprised. "But," Wickham continued, his voice trembling with emotion, "Mr. Darcy has wronged me deeply. He denied me a living that was promised by his father, a living that would have supported my future." He lowered his gaze, sorrow softening his words. "I knew him once as a friend, but he has become something very different." Elizabeth felt a surge of indignation. Darcy, the proud, dismissive, cold man she had met, had wounded this gentle, wronged young officer. The pieces fit neatly into place. And Elizabeth, guided by emotion more than caution, believed Wickham's every word. But she did not yet know the truth. She did not yet know the conflict ran deeper than she imagined. A shift in Darcy, quiet, unseen. Meanwhile, at Netherfield, Darcy wrestled with the war inside him. He had tried with all his disciplined strength to forget Elizabeth Bennet, to ignore her spark, her wit, her lively intelligence, to block out the way she walked into a room and illuminated it without trying. He told himself she was beneath him. He told himself she was unsuitable. He told himself everything pride demanded. But every time he looked at her, every time her laughter brushed his heart, every time her eyes challenged him, every time she moved with that effortless confidence, something in him cracked, something unfamiliar, unwanted, deliberately ignored. Until now, until her absence from Netherfield made him aware of it. He had not expected to see her in Meryton that day. He had not expected Wickham to appear either, and the shock of their meeting had brought every buried memory roaring to the surface. If Wickham attempted to charm Elizabeth, Darcy clenched his hands behind his back. He could not allow that. The Netherfield ball, tension ignites. The invitation arrived soon after. A grand ball at Netherfield. Mrs. Bennet nearly fainted with excitement. Jane accepted with quiet hope. Elizabeth had mixed feelings, but she went. The night of the ball glittered with candlelight and soft music. The Bennet sisters entered the grand hall, elegant in their simple but charming gowns. Elizabeth looked around for Jane, for Charlotte, anyone to ease the tension coiling inside her. But Darcy found her first. He approached. Morning light spilled through the pale curtains of Longbourn, soft as forgiveness itself. Elizabeth stood near the open window, the cool breeze brushing her face like a new beginning. The world outside felt gentler, lighter, as if nature itself had exhaled after a long-held breath. And in her heart, something had changed forever. Last night had been the unraveling of everything she once believed. Darcy's letter, now folded carefully in a drawer, had pierced through every certainty she held. Pride, prejudice, assumptions, misjudgments. They had woven themselves into her understanding of him and of herself. But today, she felt a quiet clarity, a delicate but unwavering truth rising inside her. She had been wrong about Mr. Darcy. Not entirely, no. His pride was real. His rigid manner was undeniable. But beneath it all, he was a man capable of deep loyalty, steady honesty, and remarkable love. A new light in Elizabeth's heart. As she walked through the garden that morning, the roses gently nodding in the modest wind, she replayed his words again and again, the tenderness beneath them, the vulnerability he had revealed, the silent wound he had carried from Wickham's betrayal. It humbled her. It unsettled her. It softened her heart in ways she did not expect. Around her, the colors of the world seemed different, brighter, warmer, as if seen through new eyes. Not the eyes of judgment, nor the eyes of wounded pride, but the eyes of understanding, and perhaps something more. A visit to Pemberley. Summer arrived with a gentle glow, painting the countryside in lush greens and golds. The Bennet sisters traveled north with their uncle and aunt, the gardeners, seeking a refreshing escape from the familiar fields of Hertfordshire. Elizabeth, though still composed, carried an unspoken mixture of hope and nervous anticipation. Mr. Darcy had not been mentioned since that day, yet his presence lingered inside her, steady and impossible to ignore. When the carriage finally turned onto the vast grounds of Pemberley, her breath caught. It was magnificent, not just grand, but serene, noble, and deeply harmonious with the nature surrounding it. Trees rose like protectors around the estate, their leaves shimmering in the sunlight. Streams cut across the meadows like silver ribbons. "This place," Elizabeth whispered, "is truly beautiful." Her uncle smiled. Not a man of poor taste, it seems. But inside her, a different truth stirred. To be mistress of Pemberley would be something. The thought arrived unbidden and startled her, not because she desired the estate, but because she finally understood the man who belonged to it. A chance encounter. Walking through the elegant grounds, Elizabeth approached a quiet bend near the water. The air was calm. The birds sang in soft, fluttering notes. And then, a shadow appeared. Mr. Darcy. He stopped as soon as he saw her. Surprise flickered across his face, followed by something deeper, something warm, disbelieving, and undeniably alive. "Miss Bennet." His voice was gentler than she remembered, softened by months of reflection. Elizabeth felt her heartbeat trembling in her chest. "Mr. Darcy, we had not expected to see you here." He stepped closer, sunlight outlining him in gold. "I returned early, but I assure you the fault is entirely mine. I did not expect to meet you, though—" He paused, a faint smile on his lips. "I am very glad we have." The sincerity in his voice washed over her like a warm tide. Gone was the rigid coldness. Gone was the strained pride. In its place stood a man transformed. He asked about her family, about her travels, about her comfort. Not a single word sounded forced. Elizabeth felt the change, not just in him, but also in herself. Her responses were softer. Her glances lasted longer, and her heart opened without resistance. One simple truth surfaced gently inside her. She had been wrong about Mr. Darcy. Not entirely, no. His pride was real. His rigid manner was undeniable. But beneath it all, he was a man capable of deep loyalty, steady honesty, and remarkable love. The hospitality of Pemberley. Darcy invited the gardeners to tour the estate, and Elizabeth felt her worries ease as she observed his kindness. He spoke with humility, with sincerity, and with a grace she once believed him incapable of. The housekeeper, Mrs. Reynolds, praised him warmly. "Mr. Darcy is the best of masters, miss. Generous, kind, attentive. His tenants adore him." Elizabeth felt her chest tighten. To be mistress of Pemberley would be something. When Darcy walked beside her through the gallery, stopping before his sister's portrait, he said softly, "I hope, Miss Bennet, you will meet Georgiana. She very much wishes to know you." Elizabeth held his gaze, truly held it, and her heart lifted unexpectedly. "That would make me very happy, Mr. Darcy." For a moment, neither of them spoke, but everything was understood. The return of trouble. Just when all seemed on the verge of quiet happiness, a shadow swept into their calm world. A letter arrived from Jane. Its trembling words shattered Elizabeth's breath. Lydia had run away with Mr. Wickham. A scandal, devastating, ruinous, unforgiving, threatened the Bennet family's name. Elizabeth's knees weakened. Her hands shook as the paper rustled in the wind. Darcy stepped forward at once. "Miss Bennet, what has happened?" She could barely breathe. "My sister, Lydia, has eloped with Mr. Wickham." The name struck Darcy like a blow. His face paled, not with shock, but with pain, old, familiar pain. Elizabeth forced words past her trembling lips. "This will destroy everything. My family, Jane, all of us." Darcy closed his eyes, the weight of both past and present crashing upon him. "I am to blame," he whispered. "I should have exposed Wickham long ago." Elizabeth shook her head. "No, the fault does not lie with you." But Darcy stepped back, grief and resolution intertwining in his gaze. "Miss Bennet, I must go." And before she could respond, he was gone. She stood frozen beneath the quiet sky, her heart collapsing inwards. Was this the end? Was this the moment her newfound hope shattered? Her eyes stung as she whispered into the silence, "Goodbye, Mr. Darcy." A family in turmoil. Returning to Longbourn was like stepping into a storm that showed no mercy. Mrs. Bennet wailed in despair. Kitty and Mary fretted helplessly. Mr. Bennet paced the room with hollow eyes, burdened by guilt. Elizabeth held everything inside, the weight of Lydia's recklessness, the shame of the scandal, and the fear that she had lost Darcy forever. Nights passed with little rest. Days passed with anxious waiting. Until one morning, Mr. Gardiner arrived with unexpected news. Lydia had been found, and Wickham had agreed to marry her, but at a cost. A cost far too heavy for the Gardiners alone. Elizabeth knew instantly, without doubt, without question, who had made this possible. Darcy. Her breath caught, tears filling her eyes. He had saved her family. Silently, selflessly, without seeking praise, recognition, or even gratitude. This was love. Pure, unwavering love. And she had nearly thrown it away. A return to hope. Lydia returned, proud of her romantic adventure. But Elizabeth saw the truth beneath her foolish joy. Wickham's expression was strained, his gratitude forced. But Elizabeth's heart no longer rested on their chaos. It rested on one hope alone. Darcy. Would she see him again? Would he ever believe she could return his feelings? Or had she wounded him too deeply? Days passed in uncertain silence. Then weeks. Then the final piece of news arrived. Mr. Bingley had returned to Netherfield. Jane's heart bloomed again with shy hope, and Elizabeth felt her own heart twisting with unspoken longing. Every sunset felt like an unanswered question. Until, one crisp morning, the sound of hoofs approached Longbourn. 2 riders, Mr. Bingley, and beside him, Mr. Darcy. Elizabeth's breath froze, her heart thundered. For the first time in weeks, the world seemed to breathe again. A walk of truth. When Bingley and Jane disappeared into the garden, laughter floating softly behind them, Darcy approached Elizabeth with a quiet, hopeful hesitation. "Miss Bennet, may we walk?" Her voice barely found strength. "Yes, of course." They walked beneath the old trees, their branches forming golden arches overhead. The world felt still, expectant. Darcy finally spoke, his voice low, sincere, trembling slightly. "My actions for your family, I did them only for you. You must know that." Elizabeth felt tears rise. "I do know, and I can never express my gratitude. You have been too generous, too kind. I was so wrong about you." He stopped walking. The wind rustled softly. His eyes held hers, deep and earnest. "My feelings have not changed, but you must tell me if yours have." Elizabeth placed a hand over her heart, breath trembling. "They have changed entirely. I did not know myself until I feared I had lost you forever." Darcy's breath fell unsteadily, and in that moment, every wound between them healed, every doubt faded, every distance dissolved. Then he whispered, voice thick with emotion, "You must allow me to ask you again with all my heart. Elizabeth, will you marry me?" She smiled, soft, luminous, transformed by love. "Yes, with all my heart, yes." The world seemed to brighten around them. The sunlight warmed the fields. The wind softened. Birds soared across a sky as wide and new as their future. When they returned to Longbourn, Bingley and Jane emerged with glowing smiles, a double happiness unfolding in perfect harmony. Mrs. Bennet nearly fainted with joy. Mr. Bennet hid his emotions behind quiet pride, and the Bennet household felt, for the first time in years, whole. The resolution. Elizabeth found a quiet moment that evening, standing at her bedroom window, watching the horizon burn with the colors of dusk. This journey had changed her, humbled her, strengthened her, opened her heart to love she once thought impossible. She whispered softly to the fading light, "Pride and Prejudice, and now, at last, truth." For in understanding Darcy, she had found herself, and in loving him, she had found her future. A future filled with respect, understanding, growth, and a love that would last a lifetime.